The Idaho 4 case isn't just a story about a brutal crime in a college town. It's a mirror. Every theory, every argument, every judgment reflects something back at us, whether it's our fear, our fascination, or our need to feel morally superior. We think we're analyzing the case, but really, we're analyzing ourselves. Welcome to the Character Analysis Podcast, where I play armchair psychologist and internet detective and try to figure out why people do the crazy, ridiculous, and sometimes disturbing things that they do, and why we can't look away. The third anniversary of the Idaho 4 murders is rapidly approaching on November 13th. After nearly 2 years, this case still has a grip on us, and that's because this is a very layered case. This isn't your typical true crime case where you just follow the facts and you hear a little bit about the backgrounds of the quote unquote players in this story. This is a very complex story that hits us on a lot of different levels: psychological, emotional, moral, ethical. We're obsessed not just with the crime itself, but why it happened. Because every theory, every argument says as much about us as it does about Bryan Kohberger. This case wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mirror to our own fears and judgments and moral compasses. And as the anniversary approaches, I think it's time to ask what it's really showing us about obsession and fear and human behavior itself. Let's start with the psychological layer of this case, which is the part of our brain that just can't let go. Bryan Kohberger changed his plea to guilty on July 23rd of this year, which you think would make people say, okay, so it's over. And unfortunately, especially because of the way all of the information is being shared in these little drips, drip by drip by drip, unfortunately, the questions are still there. And we have more. That's because our brain loves puzzles. And this case is a juggernaut of a puzzle. Our brains are wired for pattern recognition. They crave resolution, they crave symmetry, balance, order, even to the most logical of people. There are aspects of this case that just don't make sense. Connecting the dots gives us a sense of control, not just in a chaotic world, but it gives us a sense of control of the idea that something so horrific, that someone so evil could exist and walk among us, and we'd never know it. I'll state up front so that we're clear, and I'll say this loud for the cheap seats. I think he did it. I've always thought he did it. He took a plea. He said that he did it. And in my mind, in terms of guilt or innocence, he's guilty. But there are a lot of people who don't think that way. And their reasoning falls into some of the other layers that we're going to discuss. But from a psychological standpoint, this case has gripped us because we can't stand the uncertainty, right? The gaps, the missing pieces, the unanswered questions. And this is why we analyze and rewatch and reframe and speculate, because we need an answer. Our brains, listen, the main responsibility of our brain is to keep us alive, to keep us safe. And so when we encounter something that we can't understand or don't understand, we replay it, we revisit it. We need to figure it out so that if we encounter it again, we know what to do to survive. But it seems like every time something's answered, for every one answered question, it feels like 5 more pop up. And so we're on this constant hamster wheel of trying to figure this case out. Our brain needs answers. And even though we're getting information and we have more information than we had before, I think that there are a lot of people who are still very, very confused or still convinced that there's more to this case. And while we say that we speculate and we consume content about this case, oh, we can't get enough, we can't get enough. A lot of that has to do with the fact that our mind just can't tolerate the unknown or chaos. If there was one thing, one reaction that I think we all, whether it's the people who think he's guilty, the people who don't think he's guilty, if there's one shared emotion that we all have, is this sense of powerlessness. Because when we start feeling powerless, we start trying to control the narrative, even if it means creating one. And we create these narratives because we need an answer. So many people are stuck on the fact that we don't know a motive, where we want to know the motive. And we say that we want to know it because we're trying to determine Kohberger's innocent or guilt. But I think for a lot of people, learning that motive is what's going to give them peace. We need to understand, why would somebody do this? What do you mean there's no connection between Bryan Kohberger and Kaylee and Maddie and Ethan and Xana? This doesn't make sense. There's something so unsettling about that these 4 kids could have just been living their lives, just hanging out, doing the things that people in college do, falling in love for the first time, planning a move to start their career. We can all relate to this stuff. And so the idea that those opportunities were just plucked from these kids for no reason, there's no making sense of this. Our brains don't like that, because we need to feel some sense of control here. The idea that there could have been somebody out there, that there's somebody out there now, for all you know, watching you, watching your activity, watching your house, hiding somewhere in their car behind a tree line in a parking lot, watching you come in and out of your house, walking your dog, or coming in after a party. The idea that someone could be doing that and we could never know it is terrifying. We're not just trying to analyze this case or analyze this behavior. We're trying to find order in something where there just isn't any, right? There's just nothing about this makes sense. Why? Why would somebody do this? How could somebody do this? What do you mean he did it in 10 minutes? What do you mean he didn't leave a blood trail across the house? The thing to remember is obsession really is just control in disguise. I don't live in Moscow. I can't imagine what the citizens of Moscow, what these students, if the people outside of it, if our sense of safety has been disrupted, you can only imagine what the people living in Moscow were dealing with and probably still deal with. The ripple effect of this case and how it affected people and the different kinds of victims, because as far as I'm concerned, everybody in that town, everybody at that college, they're all victims, because what happened forever changed how it changed their worldview, right? They might not be as trusting anymore. They might be more hypervigilant. It caused them great emotional distress. That's trauma, right? The emotional distress, the disruption to our sense of safety and to our worldview. Analyzing this case allows us to intellectualize it, which means we can immerse ourselves in it and engage in it without fully feeling it and feeling the repercussions and feeling the fear. This case has become a container of sorts for emotions that we can't process or that we don't want to process. Even though we didn't know these victims personally, there's still such a profound grief for the victims, for the surviving roommates, for the family members, for the friends. I think it's touched on different things for different people. We look at these college kids, and I think a lot of us see ourselves, right? I remember when I was in college, people talk about, oh my God, they didn't lock their back door. No, because they never felt the need to. There was such an innocence there. They'd never experienced the kind of trauma that we often experience as we grow older. They weren't there yet. And there's something so tragic, I think is an understatement, about these kids thinking that they were safe when they weren't. And this is what I mean by this is the mirror effect. We look at these victims, we look at the surviving roommates, we look at this community, and something about this has resonated with us emotionally. But that emotional aspect, it has a downside. As much as we might empathize for these victims and for all the victims, everybody, the community, we also there's also a feeling of contempt. This case has this case has really encouraged or fostered a lot of outrage, much of it directed at the surviving roommates, but also directed at law enforcement. And this is where the moral and the ethical layer comes into play. This is the part of the mirror effect that gets uncomfortable because it doesn't just reflect what happened, but it reflects how we reacted to what happened. The minute the case hit the news, the lack of clarity began. People think that the information vacuum started with the gag order. It didn't. It started from day one because we didn't know anything. All we knew was this happened at the University of Idaho. It was college students. They lived in an off-campus house. We saw that one photo of the blood dripping down the foundation, which really heightened the horror aspect of this. We didn't know anything else. Once the Moscow PD started holding the press conferences, very, very little came out. But what did come out, little things like, we believe this was a targeted attack. That is all we needed. Targeted. That means it had to be somebody that knew them. I mean, you see that blood and it's dripping. That it had to have been awful. Oh, someone said the word bloodbath. Had to have been somebody that they know. The breadcrumbs that were laid out, we followed them. It didn't matter that there was no confirmation of anything. We didn't care. I think we were just so honestly traumatized by this case that we were desperate for answers, and not just desperate for answers, but desperate for justice. Eventually, the grub truck video came out. That's what really fueled the internet sleuth culture. That's what really set it ablaze because people were combing through it, every frame. Wait a minute, who's this person? Who's this person in this white hood who's standing next to the girls? Oh, does he have a knife in his pocket? What is he doing? Oh my, that's all people wanted. And because there had been such a dearth of information and we now had this one person, people latched onto it. Oh, we've got his name. Let's go to his Facebook page. Let's look him up. Let's dig into his life. Let's just expose everything about him. We decided that because he was the last person to see them, because he had his hands in his pockets. Oh, wait a minute. I heard this. And there's this rumor that he had anger issues. And it set everything ablaze. It set the tone for the remainder of the investigation. And still continues to this day. Because there was so little news or new updates about the case, people were really they were clinging to social media, anything they could find. But the more they invested, the more emotion, the more time they invested in researching this case and reading forums and making TikToks, the more they gave, the more they wanted. But more problematically, the more they felt entitled to. We started to confuse transparency with ownership. The need for control kicked in at such a high speed. We needed to figure this out because the unknown was too scary. The silence was fueling suspicion, which really encouraged people to believe, oh, they're hiding something. Oh, what's going on? Oh, they don't know what they're doing. So, well, if they don't know what they're doing, well, they need our help. Well, if they can't find it, we will. The absence of facts triggered our survival instinct. People could not rest until they restored a sense of justice. And that's where the ethical slippage began because people justified invasive behavior as self-protection. Making it worse were the contradictions. First, Chief Fry said the community was safe, but then they weren't safe. They needed to be vigilant. It was targeted, but there was no suspect. It was targeted, but they don't know if it was the house or the victims. The more, and I won't say contradictions, and I want to be really clear here. I think for a police department that has never dealt with anything of this magnitude, I think they did a phenomenal job. I think that there's some mistakes and issues, but considering the learning curve, I think they're to be commended. Unfortunately, because we didn't really know anything about this police town, and I think a lot of our sort of elitist, "Oh, it's Idaho, and they don't know and they don't know what they're doing," and we just started to collectively distrust the police. When they began to seem uncertain or when they would backtrack, that the public fills the vacuum with speculation and then starts and calls it an investigation. This case set social media on fire. You couldn't go to Reddit or TikTok without seeing an abundance of content about this case. Twitter, Facebook, it was everywhere. Groups were forming. People were looking for anything that they could find. But we weren't just watching the case, we were curating it. We were compiling data and making spreadsheets and getting names and photos like digital detectives. That's where we took ownership of this case. That's what created this collective illusion of entitlement. We started thinking if I'm emotionally invested, I have the right to access everything and anything that I want. We disguise that entitlement as accountability. If anybody started withholding information, i- if we saw any kind of privacy being put up, right, we took that as an obstruction and we immediately saw it as suspicious. The lack of commentary from the students in Idaho, that contributed to the suspicion. People think, these are college kids. You mean no one on this campus is talking? And eventually, seeking truth turned into violating boundaries. What started as concern for safety turned into a moral justification for intrusion. As the uncertainty rose, people's aggressiveness became in demanding answers. The thing is, we told ourselves we were looking for justice. And on some level, I'm sure that we were and we are. What we really were looking for was relief. That's what made the entitlement feel righteous. When any of the official voices went quiet, the loudest ones online mistook their volume for virtue. What many people considered filling the gaps of information was actually violating people's privacy and doxing people. Nobody thought anything of posting Jack Showalter or Kaylee's ex-boyfriend Jack. They didn't care. Their pictures were everywhere. People were assuming guilt. They were doing dumpster dives in their Facebook pages and in their Instagram pages and on Twitter, and everything they found just was brought to light. Then we had the 4chan posts, which, by the way, I happen to think were Bryan Kohberger, the one from Frat Anon talking about the two Davids and how they had been planning this murder since high school and they lived at the Sigma Chi house. And bro, you could see the Sigma Chi house from David so-and-so's house or room at the house. And it was 19 minutes uh, walk included from the Sigma Chi house to the King Road house. Listen, the fact this is a whole other episode, but the fact that they were able that Frat Anon on 4chan brought up the 19 minutes window timeline, brought up DNA, brought up CODIS, brought up pings. Could just be a coincidence, of course. But I'm always going to say that I believe Bryan Kohberger wrote those 4chan posts. They were putting these people's names out. They did not care. People deluded themselves into thinking, well, if they're not going to give us any answers, well, we're going to get justice for these kids. We're going to do it. It made them feel noble, that they were the ones that they were going to take over this case and they were the ones who were going to handle it. The combination of scarcity of information and emotional intensity created the perfect storm. People needed something to fill the void, and all of these algorithms on social media happily supplied it. What this mirrored in our society and in us is our inability to tolerate not knowing. It really showcased how out of sorts we become when we're faced with a situation that we can't explain. We also saw sort of the cultural collapse of boundaries. We mistook the police wanting to protect the integrity of the investigation as incompetence or suspicious behavior. As a result, we felt entitled to dox people and go through their online lives and expose them. And we did it by telling ourselves that exposure equaled justice. And this only got worse with the gag order. What the gag order showed us is that when institutions like law enforcement or lawyers, anybody, when these institutions withhold truth, the public doesn't respond very kindly to that. They don't respond with patience. We respond with possession. People didn't just cross ethical lines with this case. They convinced themselves that it was moral to do so. This is where the Miller effect stops reflecting our curiosity and starts reflecting our conscience. We stopped asking what happened, and then we started asking what should have happened. Because we lacked a suspect, we needed a villain, and the closest person was Dylan, or it was the frat guys, or it was the cartels. We needed an answer. We needed a face to look at, to put into or insert into this image that we have of this night, of the terror that these 4 kids and the 2 remaining roommates, what they were feeling. We need a face to complete the picture. Without that face, we just keep playing it over and over and over on a loop in our head. Because Dylan and Bethany didn't fit neatly into the role of victim, that made it easier for people to label them as villains. Their action, or depending on how you look at it, their non-action, it made us uncomfortable because it shattered the idea that if we were ever to be in that situation, we'd know what to do. People started projecting all of their expectations on Dylan and Bethany. They did it by saying, well, if that were me, if I had been there, if I had been in their shoes, I would have done XYZ. We need to believe that if we ever encounter such evil, we will do something that will allow us to survive. I'll go on record saying that it is the weakest people, the most unhappy people that insist upon accusing Dylan and Bethany of not being forthcoming, of being involved, of not being truthful. Calling out Dylan and Bethany, it makes these weak people feel brave, and it makes them feel better about themselves. Everybody wants to believe that they'd know exactly what to do, that they would do the quote-unquote right thing. Once that righteousness entered the conversation, that's when the cruelty became permissible. Once morality came into the picture, cruelty became acceptable. Dylan and Bethany existed and still exist in this gray area, and our brains don't like gray areas. They didn't fight, they didn't run, which automatically makes people think, well, wait a minute, that doesn't fit the picture that I have of fight or flight. What we heard in terms of what they were experiencing that night was we heard confusion, we heard fear, delayed response, and that's all trauma. That's something else that we've had mirrored back to us during or throughout this investigation. We don't understand trauma. We don't understand how trauma affects the brain. We don't understand how trauma affects memory. Here I thought that we were becoming more trauma informed. Boy, was I wrong. People wanted to simplify this. They thought in terms of right or wrong, guilty or innocent, brave or cowardly. That kind of binary thinking didn't just distort the story, it dehumanized Dylan and Bethany. The moral outrage that we say online it's not about them, it's about us. About our fear of weakness, our obsession with control, and our need to believe that we are morally righteous and that we would be the hero. It's the moral layer of the mirror effect in regards to the Idaho case that's the most revealing because it shows us what happens when judgment replaces empathy. We assigned moral meaning to every little thing that Dylan and Bethany did. I just had a comment on one of my posts today regarding the texting timeline and how they said they went to sleep. And I said, well, there's a 3-hour gap here that indicates that Dylan went to sleep for 3 hours. So she's not lying. Well, she was up from 5 to 6 writing text. Here's the document. Okay. That's an hour or an hour and a half. That still leaves an hour and a half for her to sleep. The quickness with which people jump in to try and prevent anybody from sympathizing for these two roommates is it's really startling. People who go after them are the ones who need to believe that they're the good ones. And that what's funny is they're the same people who go after creators and say, "Well, you think you know everything. You think you're better." But they're the ones who need to think that they're better. They need to keep Dylan and Bethany down so that they can elevate themselves above them. One of the reasons why so many people have stayed so tethered to this case is they wanna see Dylan and Bethany get their comeuppance. And that's where another layer of this mirror effect begins. And it's one that I think that's harder to admit for a lot of people. That has to do with what is starting to look like, or at least what I'm starting to wonder, and again, I want to be clear, this is my opinion, this is just speculation. I'm starting to wonder if because this case has been going on so long and because we've existed in this information vacuum for so long, have we developed a dependency on discussing this case? Every time we get new information, and there's a new report, there's new photos, we get that dopamine surge. Every time we come across a live or a post or a video that contains information that aligns with our own internal narrative or our own internal bias, we get we get a dopamine hit. I bring this up as someone with ADHD, which means I don't produce enough dopamine. So I've started to wonder, is my obsession with this case, my investment in this case, is it because my brain is craving dopamine and I'm getting it from this case? For the past 2.5 years, we've sort of all been in this feedback loop where we're fearful and anxious and wanting information and demanding information, which spikes our cortisol. And then we get that information, we get that release, and there's a dopamine. And we've been existing on this feedback loop like little hamsters running on wheels. We've been existing in this loop for almost 3 years. So it's difficult not to wonder at what point has this case become a legitimate addiction? We'll go through a series of days or weeks where we're getting reports and we're talking about the case and we're getting new information and we're getting some kind of relief, but eventually the information stops. Then the anxiety starts up again and the frustration. You can see it, you can feel it online. For the last 3 months, we've been on this roller coaster ever since July 23rd when the Moscow PD reports were released and we started to get more information and more details, which led to more content, which led to more discussion, which led to more time invested. But then the information stopped and we started to become agitated. You can almost tell when people have stopped getting information about this case because that's when the frustration starts to rise. That's when people start focusing on the idea of a cover up or police corruption or Dylan and Bethany. But then we get new information and oh my god, we stray away from those topics and now we're focused on topics that are legitimately morbid and this cycle just repeats. It's difficult for me to believe that that isn't having some kind of effect on our brain chemistry, that we're not experiencing some kind of neurobiological impact. When more information comes out, what ends up happening? We have more lives, we have more discussions, we have more Discord calls, we have more community, which gives us that sense of belonging. We're humans, we're wired to connect. And so that hits our reward system in all the right places. But then the information slows and we start to grieve the loss of our community, of our people. We don't just develop a chemical dependency, we develop a communal dependency. What we call obsession is really just our brain chemistry doing its job too well. The unpredictability of the release of information also contributes to the feeling of withdrawal that we go through when we're not getting a new document drop. All of this makes me wonder, will we ever stop being obsessed with this case? When you step back and you look at everything over the last almost 3 years, you start to realize that this wasn't just a story that we were following. It's not just a case. It's a story that we have stepped inside. Psychologically, it gave our brains a puzzle to solve, and ethically, it tested our boundaries. Morally, it exposed our need to judge and elevate ourselves above other people. Chemically, it keeps us coming back. Not because we want answers, but because we built a kind of emotional ecosystem around it. This case doesn't just reflect our curiosity or our ethics or our judgment. It reflects our dependency and our need for stimulation, for certainty, and for connection. The Idaho 4 case held up a mirror to everything human, the beautiful in these victims and how they were beginning their lives. And, nobody had a negative word to say about any of them. And we saw the friendship and the love between Maddie and Kaylee. And it really did. It brought us back to a time that I think many of us consider some of the best years of our lives. But it also showed us and reflected back the broken, right? Bryan Kohberger is a broken, damaged, beyond repair human being. But what this case has also showed us is the capacity for empathy that so many people have. What makes the Idaho 4 case so haunting in a dark and yet kind of brilliant way is how completely it reflects our society and human behavior. It's not just a story about violence. It's a story about us, about how fear becomes fascination, how compassion becomes judgment, and how curiosity can become obsession. This case it's not brilliant because of what happened. It's brilliant because of what it exposed, not just in a negative light, but in a positive one as well, because we learned that there are many, many people out there with a almost bottomless capacity for empathy. This case may be put to rest one day. Maybe we'll get all the answers. I don't think we will. I do think he's eventually going to talk, especially once any talk of him dies down. This is the most important this loser's ever been. So he's going to want to continue the public fascination with him. But the reflection it has left behind isn't going anywhere. This case may end one day, right? There's no the headlines, the speculation, the theories, but the reflection it has left behind, it isn't going anywhere. Thanks for listening. Make sure to follow me at My Character Analysis on all the platforms: YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Go to Substack and make sure to follow my Substack at mycharacteranalysis.substack.com. And if you want the bonus videos and the bonus episodes, make sure to subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/mycharacteranalysis. If you have any questions, if there's anything you'd like to talk about, you can email me at chris, at mycharacteranalysis.com. And I'll see you in a couple weeks.